Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is the last of the main meal prep videos for the month. So we live off-grid, as I said, and we shop every 6 weeks. And after the... I have roosters behind me. After the 6-week shopping trip, I do a series of videos covering how I make the meals, how I prep the food, preserve the food, freeze the food, all that sort of thing with that food that I buy for the 6 weeks to make it last through the 6 weeks. It is, this little spiel is what I give every one of these videos, so my regular viewers are probably really sick of hearing it. But in case this is the first time you're watching, everyone was really keen to find out how I made the food last. Like everyone loves watching grocery hauls, and I enjoy watching them too. It's really strange, but I do. And but the biggest question was always, how do you make it last? And obviously you can't make everything last. Obviously your fresh fruit and veg doesn't last for a full 6 weeks, though some things are pretty good if you store them correctly. Carrots, cabbages, potatoes, things like that will last the 6 weeks so long as you store them properly. Not always in summer, but in winter, quite often I can get them to last that full 6 weeks. Everything else gets preserved, frozen, cooked, canned, all that sort of thing. And so what I do is I do a bunch of videos after the 6-week trip, and I share what I do with everything. This is the last one from the June grocery trip, and it's only a week until I go on the next one. So the preservation and handling of the food sometimes lasts almost the whole 6 weeks to make it work well. And I'm not a big fan of like frozen casseroles or anything like that. We don't eat a lot of food from frozen, so we might cook ingredients and store them that way, or can ingredients but then we cook them afterwards. So after this video, the next video after this will be a what we eat in a week, which will be a bit of a condensed version of our lunch and dinner meals for a week's period, from getting our hamper, which is a monthly food bank type hamper. It's a $50 hamper, and nearing the end of this. I've actually been recording the meals lately too, because it's the last week of the 6-week shop, and a lot of people are always curious what we eat in that last week of the 6 weeks too. So I've been filming that as well, which will probably come out late next week. So this is the last video in the series for the June-July period of the 6-week grocery haul of all the food getting sorted. I did score some extra chicken this month through the hamper and through a friend who got some from Food Assist for me. Tenderloins were 12 kilos for $30. They got me a box of those, and then I got some chicken fillets from the hamper as well. So we've had a bit of extra meat that needed processing towards the end of the 6-week period too, and that's part and parcel of what we've done here too. So enjoy watching, and I will see you at the end. So we've got to finish off the bacon. So yesterday, or the video that I put out last, I showed you that the bacon had been brining for 7 days. And I had then removed it from the brine and put it on a rack over a tray in the fridge. So we're doing that for 24 hours so that the bacon can create, the pork can create a pellicle, which is like a sort of a skin, and it's supposed to help with the retaining of the smoke flavor. So we do that for 24 hours in the fridge, exposed, so that it can sort of just create that pellicle skin. So now it's ready for smoking. So I put a probe in the middle of the bacon, so that I could check its internal temperature when I put it in the smoker. Because I have 2 pieces, I put the probe in the one at the bottom, which is the closest to the heat source, and then when that hits temperature, I will remove that one and put the probe into the one at the top, which will then do that temperature. So it allows me to do it that way, because the one on the bottom will cook a little bit faster than the one on the top. So when the first one reached the 65 degrees Celsius, I said I pulled it out. Now you are supposed to let it cool. You're supposed to chill your bacon after you've smoked it. But if anyone who's watched around here, letting things rest and chill isn't our forte. We have train smashers of pies and things like that because we just don't let them chill and set. So we had to try it straight up. And it's so nice when you, like, even fresh like that, and it fries up so well. The homemade bacon crisps up in really quickly compared to a store-bought bacon. I'm not sure why that is, but there's also a whole lot more fat in it too, so it's really nice for cooking the other parts of your recipe in, whether it's browning bread in it, or like toasting bread in it, or cooking your chicken in it afterwards and things like that. It's a bit of effort, it's a bit more expensive. It's about $15 a kilo for a pork belly through Costco, whereas I try and buy economy bacon, which is only $5 to $10 a kilo depending on where you get it from. So it is a price increase, but I find that we eat less of it because of the quality of it too. Like, we can go through a pack of that economy bacon in one meal, whereas we would never go through a kilo of the homemade bacon because of the quality and the value of it. So I think it evens out a little bit in the end there. After that, I got started on the rest of the tenderloins. So as I said, we got the tenderloins from Food Assist. They were an extra this month, so they're now pretty much defrosted. There's just a few frozen spots in them, but in general they're defrosted. So I have to do something with the whole lot now that I've defrosted it. So first up, I put a couple of kilos into a buttermilk marinade. I did a Google. There's lots of variations of buttermilk marinades, and I used milk kefir instead of buttermilk. But in general, it was just kefir with a few herbs and spices, some salt and pepper, and then put the chickens into it, and then put a lid on that, the chicken into it, put a lid on that, and put it in the fridge for 24 hours, and we'll deal with that tomorrow, sort of thing. I grabbed another couple of kilo out and used mustard as a bit of a marinade, and then dipped them in the smoke rub that I use on chicken and pork. Now, normally when I smoke chicken like this with the rub, I do whole breasts, not tenderloin pieces, and it was a little higher rub to chicken ratio with the tenderloins, so it's a little bit strong, so it's not really snackable. Like, you know, the chicken breasts, you could slice them up and just eat them as is, and it was a wonderful sort of a ratio of that rub. This is a little bit more. These are going to have to be sliced up and cooked with other things, not eaten as they are, which is fine, but I'll have to remember that next time, that the tenderloins are small enough that the ratio of rub to them is just a little high for the quantity of chicken that's there. So as I said, I put a bit of mustard on them, I coated them in the rub, and then I placed them on the trays for the smoker. I think I filled 2 trays worth, so probably about a kilogram per tray, and smoked them while I moved on. So again, I had a probe in a piece on the lower shelf, one of the larger pieces in the middle on the lower shelf, and then rotated as needed. Pulled it out and then pulled what was cooked out in stages if necessary. I run the smoker at about 100 to 150 Celsius. It's a dual fuel smoker, so I have the gas on initially to get some wood lit, and then I turn the gas right down or off depending on ambient temperatures. In winter, you have to have the gas running most of the time because it just won't hold temperature because it's just a steel smoker, and in summer it tends to pump the temperature up higher because of the ambient temperature, so you have to be aware of that. At the moment, the bottom of the smoker isn't really set up for any significant pieces of wood. It's just supposed to have little chunks of wood. So I have a stainless steel rack in there to put the wood on so it doesn't damage any further, but it has eaten through some of the metal that was originally made because we use a bit more wood than we. I would like to eventually make a bit of a box for it to sit on, something maybe with some fire bricks or something, so I can create more of a smoking space, can put more wood and things like that in it, make that less reliant on the gas. One day, one of those many tasks that I'd like to do. With a couple more kilos of the tenderloins, I put them into a satay chicken marinade. It's been suggested for me to try the Recipe Tin Eats satay, so that's what I was going to do. So it's not the one I normally make. I normally make one that I think I made up, so I have ratios in a notebook, but I brought the curry paste that was recommended by her to give a go. So the Recipe Tin Eats, there's a specific curry paste that they suggest, so I bought that to try. I put the chicken in the marinade and into the fridge as well, so that's another one that's sorted for the moment and I'll deal with again later. The pie filling from the other day, so the chicken pot pie filling that I'd made the other day was in the fridge as well as the crust, so I decided to put that together for dinner tonight. I rolled out the crust, placed the bottom in the bottom of my cast iron dish, which is a lovely deep dish. It means I can really I can't really tip my pies out, like you can't take a whole pie out, and it makes a bit of a mess, but it's a good lot of pie filling to crust ratio, which is really nice. I filled it with filling till it was slightly mounded, and then put the topping crust on it as well. Now, I gently trimmed the edges so I could tuck the pastry back into the pie dish. Most of my pies tend to bubble a bit. The thick pie fillings are really not my forte. They tend to be quite wet, and it's kind of like a stew with pie crust, like, you know, it's nice anyway. The pie went into the oven, and then I divvied up the rest of the pie filling into Ziploc bags for the freezer. I ended up being 4 pies worth of filling out of that sort of 2 kilos of tenderloins. That was pretty neat, considering those tenderloins were only, what, $2.50 a kilo or something, and you got 4 full pie fillings out of it to go, 3 for the freezer and the one that we're eating now. So that's pretty cool. Last month I did trial defrosting beef pie filling and the crusts and cooking it after I defrosted it, and it worked really well. So it's really handy to have these in the freezer for later. Once the chicken was smoked, I pulled it out and put it in some dishes in the fridge for later. I quite like these decor glass containers. They don't have the side clips, which I have a tendency to break in my house, but you do have to be careful not to overfill them, because they do have a release on the top, and if you're putting stuff in there and it swells a bit when it freezes, the lids have a tendency to pop off and then the stuff gets freezer burnt. So you do have to be careful if you're using them in the freezer in that sense, but they are a nice glass dish for storage. I quite like them. I served up the chicken pie with mashed potato for dinner. As you can see, it's a bit of a train smash, but the pastry is so good and the filling's tasty. So my pastries that I make is the one that's got a bit of lard, a bit of olive oil, and it works really well. It's lovely and crispy, but it's not excessively short, and it holds, like, you can, if you let your pie cool, you can actually pick the pie pieces up, especially if I'm making apple pie, because apple pie filling tends to be thicker. My apple pie filling tends to be thicker than my chicken pies or my beef pies and that's because I like a lot of gravy with my pie, and I don't want to make more gravy on top of it. I want that gravy from the pie to be enough for the veggies or whatever I'm serving it with. So my pies tend to be pretty wet, and that's fine. The crust still cooks really well and crispy on the bottom though, which is great. Like, even I don't blind bake my pie crust or anything. I just put the filling in it cold and then bake it. The bottom ends up nice and crispy, the top ends up nice and crispy, and the filling ends up hot, and that's how we like it. So there is definitely things that I could do differently if I wanted to be able to actually cut it as a pie and have nice, neat looking pie pieces, but it's really not a big deal for me. The next day we started off with some small flatbreads for breakfast or lunch, as Daryl and I we don't eat breakfast as such, to give some of that smoked chicken a try. So I made up some fresh duck egg mayo, I sliced and reheated some of the smoked chicken into strips, and we had baby spinach with the mayo and the smoked chicken in soft taco type things. The chicken was perfect like this, cut up with the bread and everything else. It's just a little strong to eat straight, like biting into the tenderloins. You don't want to eat a whole tenderloin. Sliced up like this worked perfectly though. The next thing I needed to do, actually I think we ate through about half of that chicken over the couple of days with various things, and the other half went in the freezer. I think we had some with noodles at some point, or a ramen dish maybe, or something, but we ate about half of it, so a kilo of it over the couple of days, and then the other half is in the freezer at the moment. The next thing I needed to do was cook off the marinated satay chicken. Now, I have the buttermilk chicken as well, so one will be tonight, one tomorrow night. So I cooked off the marinated satay to have tomorrow, because that's a nice easy one to cook off, stick back in the fridge, and we can use it tomorrow. I just put a bit of fat in the pan and cooked it off in batches. It was very spicy, I must admit, like a lot spicier than I would normally do, but very tasty and not to the point of burning, just a lot hotter than we normally make. So if I made it again, everyone liked it though, so when I make it again, I just need to reduce that curry paste, I think, is the thing. So I did use a specific curry powder too that can be quite hot. I used the meat curry paste, the Baba's meat curry paste, which can be quite hot, so I maybe need to just tone that down. But we will make it again because it was tasty, everyone enjoyed it. So I cooked off the chicken first and just let that cool and put that in the fridge so it could be used tomorrow. I also made up the satay sauce, which is based around the same recipe because it used the other half of the tin of red curry paste. So I made that up as well and thought I'll just put it all in the fridge, and then that way we can just reheat it tomorrow. Nice easy meal. I decided to cook up the buttermilk chicken for dinner because that was the other thing that I had to be done. Now again, it's not something I've made before exactly, so I consulted Google, and there were a lot of variations on the breading. Some added some liquid to the flour to create the flakiness before dipping the chicken, and there was a lot of variations there. So in my experience, the flour gets plenty goopy enough just from dipping the chicken in there, so I didn't think it was advisable to add more liquid to the flour because I wasn't turning it into a batter. It was still a breading. So I seasoned it much the same way I normally would: salt and pepper, a bit of smoked paprika, and then I generously coated the chicken. I let it drip a second or two in the marinade, but I didn't like wipe it off or anything. I was going for that a little bit of excess of marinade when flouring, so that it could create that sort of flaky texture. I used vegetable oil. It's that cold pressed stuff that I buy from Costco that I use, that I basically only buy for this purpose. I got it up really nice and hot and just cooked off the chicken in batches, making sure not to overload the oil. If you put too much into the oil at once, it's going to drop the temperature of the oil. It'll take a while to come back to temperature, and you'll end up with soggy food rather than nice and crispy ones. So you don't want to overload your oil when you're doing it for that sort of thing. I cooked up the whole lot was there, which was more than we needed for one meal. I'm pretty sure it was about 2 kilos worth, because that's sort of what I split all the chicken into, but I decided to cook it all up at once while I had the oil out, because it just made sense to do that. We served it with mashed potatoes, steamed veg, and then the chicken, and seeing as I was the cook, I got myself all those little bits of tiny chicken and crumbs to crunch on as well. So I served myself up those ones. It didn't need any sort of sauce or gravy or anything, though it would be nice with a gravy, but it was flavorful enough as it is. The chicken was really moist and it had that tang to it from the kefir and the spices in the breading and stuff, so it was fairly tasty on its own. But yeah, it would have been nice dipped in gravy as well, if that's what we decided to do. I froze the rest of the chicken. I'm not sure how it's going to reheat, but I wanted to give it a go because I fried it all up and I thought it's got lots of oil in it because it's been fried, so theoretically I should be able to reheat it in the oven or the barbecue. I don't want to refry it. I want to be able to like barbecue bake it. So I put it in the freezer anyway. I flash froze it loose so that it wouldn't stick together, and then put it in a Ziploc bag in the freezer to give a go at cooking later on in the month and see how it goes and whether that's something that I would do more regularly. There was a few kilos still extra of the tenderloins, so I put those in vacuum seal bags and stuck them in the freezer because I just had done everything I wanted to do, and just had extra left. So I thought I'd just freeze that raw. I don't love freezing chicken raw, but I did it and put it in the freezer for later on. The next day I had to work on the rest of the beef trim I had. So I cut it up, trying to keep some diced chunks aside to use in whatever I decided, and the rest was put in a bowl to be minced. The easiest thing we can do with this beef is just mince it and use it as beef mince, or put it in the freezer as beef mince, which is really easy to defrost and just so versatile. I know a lot of people they find mince boring, but I make a lot of different things with mince, and I can make a lot of different flavors with it. And being this beef trim, it's a good texture mince too, because it's got because I only coarse grinded, it's quite a good texture with it. Now, because I was cutting the bits of the dice off it too, it means that what I do mince will be a bit fattier, which is, some people don't like that, but I quite like that for flavor purposes. So I managed to get a couple of kilos of the fairly lean diced beef out of it. I put a bit of salt and pepper on them and transferred to them smoker racks. I didn't want too fatty diced beef because I wasn't slow cooking it. So what I was going to do was I'm just going to hit them with smoke for a bit. So I stuck them on the tray and in the smoker for like 45-60 minutes. So they're not cooked. They are pretty much cooked because it's beef, but they're rare in the middle, which is fine. I used some of my stainless steel dehydrator racks on top of the smoker racks because the smoker racks would have been too large and the beef would have potentially fallen through. So I used the stainless steel racks on top of them, and that way the beef wasn't going to fall through. So I did 2 trays with it, and I assessed the trays as I went. I wasn't looking for anything in particular other than hitting them with smoke for 45 to an hour. So it was running at like the 100 degrees Celsius with a good chunk of wood in it and just smoking it out. The rest of the beef I minced up. Again, I'm using my Luvele meat grinder. I really adore it, and I mention it all the time, and I sound a bit silly about it, but it has made my life a lot easier, especially now that I'm buying so much meat that I do mince up. It has really just made things easier. I used the coarse grinding plate, which is that's the texture that we like. As I said, if I buy mince from Costco, which is minced from this same beef, they run it through the grinder twice, so it's a lot softer, a lot finer grind, and I find a lot less texture to it, and it tends to fall apart. Whereas when I grind it in this coarse grind, it's quite chunky, which is what we like. I did have to stop halfway through because the meat was a little warm, because I'd cut up the diced stuff first and then I hadn't put it back in the fridge, and then I was trying to grind it. So I ended up putting the beef and the grinding plate and everything in the freezer for half an hour and then mincing it again. So if your meat gets too hot, it starts mushing as it comes through instead of cutting. It's the grinder gets a bit too hot and it doesn't work as well. It makes the grinder work harder. The texture isn't as nice. You get bits of sinew stuck around the blades because it's not going through properly, and you really want it nice and cold. So if you have that problem, then just stick the meat and the grinding plate and everything in the freezer for half an hour and then pull it out again, and it will be so much better. You'll be able to recognize when it's too hot. You can see the difference in the way it grinds. I minced the whole lot and I decided just to bag it up and freeze it for now. I've been very lucky this month because I bought all my usual meat and I managed to get a few bits and pieces from everything else. So I've bumped my meat stock up quite considerably this month because I bought the normal 3 porks and then I bought the beef trim again. And prior to buying the beef trim, I was only buying 8 to 12 kilos of mince a month, or every 6 weeks, and these beef trims last month's was 20 kilo box and this one was 16, I think. So I'm already bumping up my meats by beef stocks there. So I'm going to have a good stock of vacuum sealed beef mince, which is just ideal. Like I'll probably buy the trim again this month, but then I might not need it again the month after because I'll have surplus enough to not need to. We can only hold a certain amount of surplus in the freezer because we only have limited freezer space. So that's, you know, we will assess that as we go. I will do a planning video sometime at the end of the week in preparation for the next one to show you some stocks and levels of things and inventories and stuff too. So this is what the smoked beef looked like when it came out of the smoker. I used a tray of it for dinner that night, a stew. I'll show you that in the what we eat in a week video. And the other tray I put in the freezer. I'll probably make pie filling with that one. So it's a really tasty way to do it. Like it's beef, and beef is tasty anyway, but then to hit it with that smoke as well, it's got this really nice flavor, and the stew was really smoky and the depth of flavor was awesome as well. So I probably make a really nice pie filling. So I will pull that bag out of the freezer and then just slow cook a pie filling during the day, or pressure cook maybe. I really need a smaller pressure cooker to do like that sort of thing. My canners can be used as cookers, but the smallest one I've got is 21 litres. So it's a little large to be doing small batches. It burns, and yeah, I think I need to buy myself like a small stovetop pressure cooker, just a little like 7-litre one or something, to make small dishes like pie fillings and things like that I want to do. I could use the Wonder Bag too. I could give that a go because the meat's already partially cooked, and then I'm going to boil it in the pie, though there's not a whole lot of liquid in pie filling, so I wonder if that would impact it going in the Wonder Bag. I don't know. I'll have a think about it and I'll share it when I do it. But the smoked beef is really nice to have in the freezer. I used to make jerky a lot in the dehydrator, but we're having issues with power supply and stuff, so we haven't been using the dehydrator. But I do wonder that now that I have more control over the smoker and how I use it, that I could probably get away with doing jerky in the smoker. So that might be something that I'll do as well. If I have to buy topside fairly cheap, so it depends on whether I can get a roast that's adequate for it fairly cheap. The trim definitely wouldn't have enough for me to cut nice thin slices off it for the jerky, but so I'd have to buy a roast specifically for that. So I'll just have to check the butcher and see what I can find. But that was it. So that is pretty much every piece, well, it is every piece of meat that I bought now, either in the freezer or in meals or in jars. I think I canned a bunch of that pork up too, but I think that's on a different video. So I did a whole batch of plain pork in jars, and everyone's been asking me to do more canning videos, so I think I did that on its own to show you how I just can straight pork. So I'll put that one out as well. And then yeah, so we'll have a what we eat in the week in the next couple of days that will show you a variety of meals, including that stew and things like that. And then I'll see you on whatever the next one happens to be. Thanks for joining me again, guys.